Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Flowers of the Forest, written by Coyote Havoc. Humans are very good at making a point. I can neither understate or overstate this observation. I was there on Earth when they demonstrated their absolute mastery of this skill. I have never forgotten that day, nor do I think I ever will. At the very least, I would prefer not to forget. I was much younger then, a proud commander of the Ara fleet. I had sharpened my beak at Tyvesk and Fakken against the Grapth. My talents were honed on my jet station, where we had snatched victory from the Graph in the face of overwhelming firepower. Our war had raged for over 20 solar rotations, and that is when the Graph and the Ara made their most atrocious mistake. Our war spilled over our respective borders into human space. A world they had recently colonized, they had maimed respite. We only realized the damage we had done when the human delegation was sent to our respective core worlds, and an invitation was extended to both combatants to meet at peace talks on Earth. To be quite frank, neither the Ara or the Grapth desired peace, but we humored the human in order to wash away the incident our fighting had caused. We would placate them and assure them that it would never happen again, and then go about our merry way trying to annihilate each other. We would quickly see how foolish we had been to believe that that was a possibility. Both delegations were welcomed with the typical pomp and circumstance allotted for any attempts from a foreign nation to settle a dispute. Both belligerents seated apart with a peaceful delegation strategically placed between them at all times. Weapons were forbidden for obvious reasons, but what struck us in the Grapth delegation as odd was the location. Instead of a major city such as New York or the center of government such as Berlin, they had decided on a population center less than 50,000 named Wegum. If that wasn't enough of a deviation, they also announced that all parties should be expected to be ready before the local star had even broke the horizon at 0700 local time. We were there to humor the humans, so we took it in stride. After all, many species had tried and failed. What could the humans do the others had not already tried? As requested, everyone was awake and dressed in their ceremonial best before dawn, and both us and the Grapth were surprised to find a human military detachment waiting for us, armed with ancient gas and piston-operated rifles. A Grapth general was the first to raise a complaint, but the human delegation assured us that the weapons were ceremonial and showed us that they were loaded with blanks. They then bid us to walk with them in the foggy pre-dawn air so that they can hear both sides of our war and what it was over. Assured that we wouldn't have far to walk, we ventured out onto the streets of the small town and began to discuss the reason for the war, still thinking to ourselves that we were humoring the humans. The journey and discussion ended at a stone gate that was lined with trees barely visible in the darkness and fog, but we could hear human music coming from within. "Honored guests," our human hosts began, "welcome to the opening ceremony of the Wegum Peace Talks." The bark was simple, yet immaculate, even in the mists and shadows. The farther we ventured down the lane past the gate, the closer and clearer the haunting music became. The music was called a ballad, and it was sad and sweet. The first verse was lost in the dew and gloom, but I remember hearing the last part of the refrain clearly. Let the band play the last post and chorus. Let the pipes play and the flowers in the forest. I can remember looking over at the human delegation, hoping for an answer, and seeing the three eyes of Graft also blinking in confusion. Did you leave a wife or sweetheart behind, in some faithful heart if your memory enshrined? Although you died in 1916, in some fateful heart are you forever 19? Or are you a stranger without even a name, enclosed in forever behind a glass frame, in an old photograph, torn, battered and stained, and faded to yellow in a brown leather frame? As the refrain repeated it slowly dawned upon Ara and Grumpf alike, the humans were openly weeping, not even trying to hold back their tears in a show of stoicism. A crass display, to be certain, but one that no one dared to call out. It became all too clear as their star rose over the horizon and lit our understanding of what they were showing us. The sun now it shines on these green fields of France. There's a warm summer breeze that makes the red poppies dance. And look how the sun shines from under the clouds. There's no gas, no barbed wires, no guns firing now. In the new light of the day, we realized where we were. A small, intricate stone arch stood watch over the hundreds of gravestones. But here in the graveyard is still no man's land. The countless white crosses stand mute in the sand. To man's blind indifference to his fellow man, and a whole generation that were butchered and damned. This was no opening ceremony. Did they beat the drums slowly? Did they play the fife lowly? Did they play the death march as they lowered you down? It was a warning and a promise. Humanity had almost destroyed themselves in conflicts as the music had made plain. How much havoc would they wreak on us? Did the band play the last post and chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers in the forest? We had involved humanity in our petty conflict, and they were going to end it one way or another. As if to hammer in the point, the last verse was sung. Our young Willie McBride, I can't help but wonder why. Do those that lie here know why did they die? And did they believe when they answered the cause? Did they really believe that this war would end wars? Well, the sorrow, suffering, the glory, the pain, the killing, the dying were all done in vain. Horror hit both the graps and the horror simultaneously. For young Willie McBride, it all happened again, and again, and again, and again, and again. He had been invited into a tragedy of a species who knew death and despair on a deep and personal level, who had strived to be better, and always slipped back into their atrocities. We would learn from their mistakes, or suffer their fate alongside them. After the Treaty of Wagram was signed, I decided to look into a war that was mentioned in that heart-wrenching song. 8.5 million of their soldiers and 6 million of their civilians had died by the time peace was finally established, on the 11th day of the 11th month, in their year 1918. 20 years, 9 months and 21 days, their Second World War began. The same amount of time the Ara and Graf had been at war. End of story. Story number 2. Wise Humans, written by Magic Rectangle. Hold my beer! My new friend Todd was the first human I ever met. He was about 2 meters tall, with a brownish skin, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, seemed perfectly ordinary, intelligent life form. Todd and I worked construction on SETI Colony, our people's first large-scale joint venture with the humans. We worked all kinds of odd jobs, really. Neither of us had advanced training in any particular field, so we just shuffled around to do whatever needed an extra set of tentacles. We got into the habit of hanging out after work, since neither of us had any family on world. Todd was always fun to talk to, and got even more fun after he had a few beers in him. Unfortunately, his biocompatibility scanner told me that drink wasn't suitable for ingestion, so I stuck to apple juice, a tasty beverage from the human homeworld. That night wasn't much different from any other. We were wandering the construction site for the new nesting area. As you probably know, no nesting area is complete without a breeding pit. That day, we had finished digging out the massive hole, but it hadn't yet been filled with nutrient fluid. In fact, it hadn't even been sealed with a layer of polymer. It was just an empty half circle carved from solid rock. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, buddy? Todd had a gleam in his eye as he surveyed the empty pit. Almost certainly not. Skateboard! I wasn't sure what I was supposed to understand from that word, but Todd did not elaborate, instead pouncing on a nearby pile of scrap. He wielded his pocket welder in one hand and his spear in the other as he constructed some sort of rudimentary transportation device. When his work was done, he turned back to show me the fruits of his labor. It was little more than 2 sets of wheels attached to a piece of sheet metal, but he looked at it with a childlike glee. Hold my beer! It was a week and a half later that I came by to pick Todd up from the medical unit. I had lied and said that his injuries were incurred during the course of our duties. There was some doubt from the shift supervisor, given the timing, but we were often the last to leave the job site, due to being responsible for some of the daily cleanup. He couldn't prove the injury wasn't job-related, so he'd just have to eat it. Honestly, I don't know what you were thinking, Todd. My mind wandered back to the events of that night. After handing off his beverage, Todd had put on one foot on the skateboard and simply dropped over the side of the breeding pit. I had no idea what he thought would happen, but what transpired was exactly what any thinking being ought to have expected. For perhaps a second, Todd's feet remained on the board, but the surface of the pit was uneven, not having yet been polymer sealed. The vibrations as the board rolled faster and faster across the rough surface eventually kicked out from under him. He tumbled end over end all the way to the bottom of the pit. Thank the Omni Queen for the nanite healing tanks. Not even 1 century ago, a human medical science would have been unable to restore Todd to full function. A few months, maybe. A terraforming process on SETI colony had already progressed to the point of breathable atmosphere, but it was vital to keep a close eye on every aspect of the new biosphere, hence the monitoring station. Station 27 was at the top of a rather large cliff, a convenient location from which to both launch and monitor weather balloons, as well as run a variety of other equipment neither of us understood. It was an evening not unlike any other. Todd and I had finished our work, and we sat near the edge of the cliff, looking out across the barren landscape as we sipped our beverages and discussed heady topics. So, human isn't actually your species name? Technically no. Basically, as soon as our ancestors started walking upright, they are humans. There's a whole bunch of different species under that umbrella. I'm not a scientist, but I think it's called a genus. Wait, I needed a second to process this. Are there other intelligent species on your planet? Oh no, they're all gone. I think we killed or screwed them all out of existence. Again, not a scientist. But there was something about that in the school, I'm sure. Okay, so if your species isn't human, then what is it? Homo sapiens sapiens. I blinked at my translator app. You called yourselves the wise humans? Huh? I don't know. It's Latin, I think. Is that what it means? What the feck? Todd seemed to be done with the conversation. His eye had been drawn to a pile of scrap that should have been a weather balloon, but it had been damaged in transport. Now it was little more than some lightweight composite alloys with large sheets of strong, thin fabric. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, buddy? Oh, most certainly not. Hang glider! Tom unclipped his pocket welder from his belt. Wise humans. Hold my beer! End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Bitmori, Terran on Air, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lightjock, Dragzoon WRE, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian. Thank you.